All right. I am going to do pardon my voice. I've been a little bit under the weather, I guess, or not that. But just pardon my voice. I am a little bit hoarse. Um, all right. We're going to do the presidential election. I've analyzed this, and I believe it is accurate based upon what I've seen in trends and what have you. We're going to be going from west to east, and that's going to be easy to do. First, we're going to start with Hawaii. Hawaii has always been a Democrat state, and I think it's going to stay that way, especially, with the majority of its population being Japanese and Native Hawaiians, and those individuals tend to vote more Democrat than Republican. So we're going to give that to the Democrats. Next, let's go to Alaska. Alaska has always been heavily Republican. I don't see it changing anytime soon. Plus, also, 81% of the votes in Alaska in the Democratic primary went to Bernie Sanders. So, therefore, I'm going to say even then he would get a chunk of Bernie Sanders voters. That is Donald Trump. So, Trump will win Alaska. All right. Next, we're going to go to Washington State. In Washington, based upon the primary numbers, 531,000 approximately voted Republican, and 745,342 voted Democrat. However, of those 745,000, 357,000 voted for Bernie Sanders. And even if Trump were able to get a third of Bernie Sanders voters, which I think he is, considering all the scandals going on with Hillary Clinton, that would add to Trump's number approximately 120,000 votes, which would take him up to about 650,000. Then you would have to take 120,000 away from Hillary, and you get a vote total of about 620,000, which would be about about 20,000 less than Trump. So I think this is going to be an upset. Plus, Trump's voters are much more, enthusiastic about this election. So I'm going to give this Washington to Trump. Oregon is very similar to Washington. The Democrats had 572,485 voters during the election, approximately, whereas the Republicans had 361,490. However, Bernie Sanders had 320,000 of those Democrat voters out of 572. And being this Oregon is kind of a granola state, I do see that many of those individuals could be enticed by Donald Trump. I think it could be as high as 40% of the Bernie Sanders voters. And that would be approximately 150,000 extra voters. Well, if that's the case, you add 510,000 to 150,000, you get 650,000. You take that away from 745, and you get like 590. So I give Oregon to Trump. Now, California. With California, it's pretty obvious that the winner will be Hillary Clinton, considering in California there were about 2 million more votes for Democrats than Republicans. And, on top of that, there's a heavy Hispanic population. And with Trump's stand on illegal immigration, I don't see them voting for him. So California is going to go for Clinton. Nevada. With Nevada, it's been Republican in the past and recently has gone Democrat barely. But 47% of the voters went for Sanders, and I think that's enough to tip it in favor of Donald Trump if he gets a third of Sanders voters. So I'm going to give Nevada to Trump. Oops. All right. Next one will be Idaho. And with Idaho, it's always been a reliable Republican state, and it's going to stay that way. So give that to Trump. Utah, despite what people say about, the Mormon population not supporting Donald Trump, I don't think that's the case. Plus, 79% of the voters in the Democrat primary voted, or caucus rather, whatever, voted for Bernie Sanders. So there's no way Hillary Clinton can win this state. This goes to Trump. Arizona. Arizona had about 35,000 more voters, 36,000 more voters in the primaries than the Democrats. Since Republicans are also more enthusiastic, and since a certain percentage of those went for Sanders, who switch over to Trump, you got to give Arizona to Trump, particularly considering many in that state are tired of the illegal immigration. Next, we go to Montana. Montana has been traditionally Republican, and I think it's going to stay that way. Wyoming, the same thing. Colorado, I believe, is going to fall for Trump, and here's why. The polls, even though I don't put much of any stock in it, even the polls show that Donald Trump has been ahead in Colorado at some times and then a little bit behind. But I think the enthusiasm factor is going to be there. I think Colorado goes for Trump. New Mexico. With New Mexico, I'm fairly certain it's going to go Democrat for Hillary Clinton, because in the primaries there were 214,307 Democratic voters and 95,000 Republicans. I mean, you got to consider Nevada is heavily Hispanic and American Indian, and as a result, that demographic tends to vote Republican on average. So even though there were a lot of Sanders voters, I don't think it's enough to put Trump over the top. So this goes to Clinton. All right, next we have North Dakota. North Dakota has always been reliably Republican, so I'm going to give it to them to give it to Trump. South Dakota has always been reliably Republican, and same thing as well. And Nebraska, you have to say the same thing as well. For Kansas, same thing. Always reliably Republican, it goes for Trump. Oklahoma also goes for Trump. Oklahoma has always been one of the most conservative states, so Trump gets it. Texas, in the Republican primary, there were 2,700,000 voters approximately, and only 1,410,000 Democrats. With that being the case, Trump's going to get it. Minnesota. In Minnesota, Democrats brought people to the polls than Republicans, 191,000 to 112,000. But of that 191,000, Bernie Sanders voters were 118,000. If you only take approximately a third of those voters, that were around 40,000 voters, and you add them to Trump's numbers, that's 152,000. You take those 40,000 away from Hillary Clinton, and that would take it down to approximately 151. A statistical dead heat, but also the Republicans are more enthusiastic, so I am going to give Minnesota to Trump as well. Next, we have Iowa. Iowa has been more enthusiastic Republican. And Bernie Sanders almost won this. So with the very high percentage of white voters in Iowa, I'm fairly certain this is going to go for Donald Trump. Missouri. In Missouri, I'm fairly certain that it's going to go for Donald Trump as well. There were approximately 300,000 more Republican voters in the Republican primary as opposed to the Democrat primary. So therefore, easily Trump. Arkansas. In the state of Arkansas, it's going to go Republican. There were almost double the number of Republican voters in the primary than Democrats. So that goes to Trump. Louisiana. Now, Democrats actually outnumbered Republicans in the primaries by about 2,000, but I just don't think there was a whole lot of enthusiasm in the primaries in Louisiana. But since this has been a reliable Republican state, I'm going to give it to Trump. Wisconsin. With Wisconsin, there were more Republican voters in the primaries than Democrats, and of the 1 million voters in the Democrat numbers, 567,000 voted for Bernie Sanders. Significant number of those will jump to Trump, so Trump gets it. Illinois. State of Illinois had about 600,000 more Democrat voters in the primaries, and with those kind of numbers, I don't see Donald Trump being able to pull that out in Illinois, so that goes to Clinton. Mississippi. The state of Mississippi had almost double the number of Republican voters in the primaries than Democrats, so this is always Republican, reliably Republican, so it goes to them again. Indiana. The state of Indiana had over 400,000 more voters in the Republican primaries than Democrat, plus they have Mike Pence on the ticket of Trump, so he's clearly going Trump. Next we have Alabama. State of Alabama, highly Republican. There were 450,000 more votes for Republicans than Democrats, and so Alabama will go for Trump. Kentucky. State of Kentucky is always reliably Republican, so it's going to go for Trump. Tennessee had nearly almost 500,000 more Republican voters in the primaries than Democrats, so Tennessee goes for Trump. Michigan. State of Michigan will go for Trump. There were almost 100,000 more Republican voters in the primaries than there were Democrats, and Trump voters are very enthusiastic. So I see Michigan going for Trump. Ohio. State of Ohio had almost double the number of Republican voters in the primaries than Democrats. No doubt about it, Ohio's going for Trump. State of Georgia. In the state of Georgia, a highly Republican state, even though it's been close at times because of the high black population percentage in the state, which is approximately, almost 40%, or if not there, 35%. And them being a highly Democrat voter, there were still over 500,000 more votes cast for Republicans, and the white population in Georgia is highly Republican. I'm thinking they'll probably come out for Trump about 90%, or around that about. So I'm going to, or maybe 80 to 90%. So I'm going to give Georgia easily to Trump. Florida. Florida had about 600,000 more Republican votes than Democrats. Plus, Florida has a high senior citizen population, and senior citizens are very active in voting. And most of those are Republican. I clearly see this going for Trump. South Carolina. South Carolina had about over about double the amount of Republican voters in the primaries than Democrats. So South Carolina goes Trump. As you can see, Donald Trump's already won the election, but I'm going to continue on. West Virginia. The state of West Virginia did have more Democrats in the primaries than Republicans, but most of those are Sanders, Bernie Sanders, and with a, like a third or or even a quarter of the voters, that's enough to tip it to Trump if they deflect from Bernie Sanders. So I'm giving West Virginia to Trump, also particularly because it's been reliably Republican over the years. North Carolina. With North Carolina, there were about 25,000 more Republican votes in the primaries than Democrats. However, also there are the Republican voters are much more enthusiastic, and Trump has been rallying hard in this state. So I'm going to give North Carolina to Trump. Virginia. Virginia had, and I don't agree with the polls or what anybody says, there were 1,012,807 Republican votes, approximately, in the Virginia primaries. And the Democrat primaries only had 778,000. That's over 220,000 fewer. Honestly, I think Virginia is going Trump. Maryland. State of Maryland had almost double the number of Democrat voters in the primaries than Republicans. That's clearly going for Clinton. Then we had Delaware. Delaware had about 30,000 more votes. And that's a small state anyway, so 30,000 is a lot. I don't see Trump being able to take Delaware, so this goes to Clinton. Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, the Republicans had 1,537,696 votes in the primaries. The Democrats had 1,638,644, just a little bit over 100,000 more. However, 719,000 of those Democrat votes, approximately, were Bernie Sanders voters. And therefore, if, let's say, a third of those voters deflect to Trump, it's going to put Trump over the hump. So Trump takes Pennsylvania. New Jersey. State of New Jersey is going to go to Clinton. There were almost double the number of Democrats in the primaries than Republicans, and it's been a reliably Democrat state, so it goes to Clinton. New York, same thing. There were over double the amount of Democrats in the primaries than Republicans, and even though Trump is from New York, I don't see him being able to overcome that in that state. So New York goes for Clinton. Connecticut. Connecticut had 208,817 Republican voters and 324,485 Democrat voters. Trump's not going to be able to take that. That's too much. So Connecticut goes to Clinton. Rhode Island. Rhode Island had 119,000 Democrat voters approximately and 60,381 Republicans, about a half of what the Democrats have. Although Bernie Sanders had a large chunk of those voters, I don't think it's enough to take Rhode Island, so it goes to Clinton. Then we have Massachusetts. Whoops, let me fix that. Massachusetts had almost double the amount of Democrat voters than Republicans in the primaries. It will go for Clinton. Vermont. State of Vermont, I believe, is going to go for Trump, and here is why I say that. There were 58,762 Republicans in the primaries and 134,198 Democrats. However, those 134,000 Democrats, 115,000 of them were Bernie Sanders. So Hillary only got about 19,000. Now, let's say 1/3 of those voters switch over to Trump. That'd be approximately 40,000 votes. That'll take Trump's numbers up to about 98,000 and bring Hillary's down to 94,000. So I think Trump takes Vermont. New Hampshire, there were more Republicans than Democrats voted in the primaries, about 30,000. And of the 246,000 Democrat votes, 151,000 went to Bernie Sanders, of which a percentage will go to Trump. I don't think there's any way Clinton wins New Hampshire. Trump wins it. And then in Maine, I believe that because Bernie Sanders got a high percentage of the Democrat vote, and because the Maine's 3rd district typically goes Republican, oops, we'll give that to Trump. But I also believe that the state as a whole can go for Trump. So I'm going to go out on a limb and go for Trump here. Although this is probably the least confident of the states that I have. So there you have it. Trump wins by 373 electoral votes to Clinton's 162. Tell me what you think. Leave your comments in the section. Thanks.